This is the ballad of a guy named Jackalope Jim. He was the West's quickest draw, and no one could beat him. At the tender age of 10, he lost his mom and pop. So with a gifted metal arm, became a man of the law.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our show, The Birth of Jackalope Junction. My name is Russ the BIG Guy, and it's my privilege to introduce to you the founder and visionary behind Jackalope Junction, the world's first steampunk Western story park, and he's the CEO of Acorn Entertainment Group Incorporated, a transmedia, storytelling, and themed entertainment design company. Hello, Greg Schumsky.
Hello, Russ. How are you?
I'm awesome. All right, great. So we've done a couple for our viewers who may know. We did a couple episodes in advance, and we're kind of trying to get our feet wet here to establish, sort of like the history and the background. And so 100 years from now, when our ancestors look back and want to know all about the origins of Jackalope Junction, they're going to find out what Greg was thinking before the shovels hit the dirt. So that's why we're here. And today we're going to talk with Greg about, first about IAAPA. So this is the end of November, 2021. And Greg has gone to his first IAAPA, International Association of Amusement Parks and Attractions Expo. And so how was the expo, Greg? Pretty impressive.
Yeah, impressive is an understatement. It was overwhelming. I had wanted to go to IAAPA for years. Well, 3 or 4 years or something like that, later, 5 years maybe. And this is my first opportunity to go to one because of Jackalope Junction and because a lot of people knew about Jackalope Junction already. People in the industry knew about it. I was blown away by how many people actually knew about it that I don't directly converse with in the industry or around my circle of influence. There were so many people that came up to me at the show because I either had on this shirt that says Jackalope Junction on it, or one of my Jackalope Jim shirts under a nice jacket and slacks or whatever. And I had people literally come up to me, stop me in my tracks on the show floor and say, "Oh, I know this, and I follow you on LinkedIn or Instagram, and this is the greatest thing ever. When can you have it built?" And we need this, or people are and we'll get more into this later, but it was really quite overwhelming. I had so many meetings on day one, and unexpected meetings in between those meetings, and the same thing with day two. I tried to back it off a little bit, and more happened. It was extremely exhausting from not just a physical standpoint, but from a mentally exhausting as well, and very emotional at the same time. Being able to talk about Jackalope Junction to people was really such a blessing, and what it's about, and the values, and the fact that this is not. We're basically reinventing the themed entertainment genre, more or less, the way that Walt Disney reinvented the amusement park and carnival genre with Disneyland. And people looked at Walt and said, "Oh, well, you're just putting another carnival, and that's a stupid idea." And they called it Walt's Folly. And it takes a while to find people that really grasp onto what Jackalope Junction really is, and we'll get into that later too, obviously, in either this or more episodes down the road of what it really is. It's not a theme park, and I say and I use story park, but that's a thing, or maybe we call it a history park, but it's not really like Williamsburg or something like that. But for all intents and purposes, it's a historical. It's actually a step back in time into history of this fictional town of Jackalope Junction.
So I can tell that this was something that really resonated with you and connected with you emotionally, and you actually you're getting softer in your voice, and you could sort of get a feel for it. And so I can tell that you're a compassionate guy. Because I was going to ask you, how did that impact you when people came up to you and said, "Hey, we love this and we need this"? And I realized that as an entrepreneur myself, and as somebody who has come up with different ideas for things, in the past, you don't really need the validation from other people when you're a creative, because there is a different drive. It's an inner drive or a mission to get it done. But it's always nice to know that you're kind of on a track where if the success of your project is determined by acceptance by the community, right? I mean, you need customers or clients. That's so important.
Right.
So you're getting some of that validation, at least through the industry right now.
I got people that have been in the industry a long time, Pete Carcillo, Jason McManus, other guys from big companies have been around the block for ages and have been in the business for forever. It seems like had nothing but positive things to say and how it's inspired them as well. And that blows me away. It's extremely surreal, but it also it's very humbling at the same time. And I believe that we're onto something really great that is going to, people go to these immersive environments. So when I was at IOPA, of course, being in Orlando, I had to go look at the work that Joe Rohde and his team did at Disney World at Animal Kingdom, because I wanted to see how he built Africa. And was it a Disney-fied version of Africa? And it's really not. It is dirty. Well, not dirty, but it's worn.
Yeah.
And it's beat up. And the same thing with Asia, the whole Nepal thing where, Joe, it's well documented that Joe and some of his team went to Nepal and hung out with the Mustang King and spent time in Mustang country, understanding the culture. And that's where Joe's strength lies, is that he is a really great historian and he's an archaeologist, more or less. He goes in, he digs, learns, takes lots of notes, takes lots of pictures, documents the whole thing well enough, and absorbs it. So when he comes back and he builds Nepal and the Expedition Everest, so if you stand at a certain point in the park in the Nepal section, the Asia section, there's a temple there. And if you stand at the temple at the right angle and there's Expedition Everest behind it, they're the same shape. So the temple is a silhouette of the mountain.
Yeah.
So that's smart. And there's other things he's done. They have all these decorative things that are not faked, bought off, that the Imagineers made, some of them maybe, but a majority of the stuff he has in Africa and in Nepal are actual things made by the crafts people from those areas.
Yeah.
Masks, flags, et cetera, that they bought and brought back with them and used to decorate, to create an immersive ambiance that you would not get at a place where everything is made to be fake. So
yeah,
I wanted to study that. I wanted to study how to see, okay, how did he pull this off? How did he make it an immersive environment? When you go on the train in the Africa section, it's not a smooth train ride like you get at Disneyland. It's very rough. It's very rickety.
Yeah.
There's a lot of slop to it. It's perfect because it fits in with what you'd expect. So it says to me, with our trains at Jackalope Junction, we have to make them feel very rough and rickety and stuff because they're old mining trains and train tracks. So these are things you have to think about when creating really a cool. There's so much to learn. It's just how much there's to learn. Anyway.
Well, you can't do everything yourself, obviously. So you're meeting different people, and you're getting acceptance from the community. So for our viewers right now, we're at the very beginning of this series, and so they know there's Jackalope Junction. They don't really know kind of the overview of what it is or why it exists and that sort of thing. So you talked a little bit about story, and that's kind of the thing that really intrigued me and got me interested, was the fact that it's an immersive and interactive experience for people when they go to get Jackalope Junction, and you're actually teaching kids and families values and like the positive things that people need to understand and to replicate in their lives. So there are lessons, but it's done in a fun way, and I think that's a really important part. And of course, the whole thing is themed and it's unique, and all the different parts of it, of course, which you're going to talk more about. So what was the origin of this in your own mind? I know that we had talked about this in the past and you wanted to cover it today. You woke up one morning and said, we need a story park.
It really started with we have an amusement park in San Diego called Marshall Scotty's. Well, had, and it still is there. It's an abandoned amusement park. It's been abandoned for 20 some odd years, as it opened in 1967. So there's a picture of me with my mom and my older brother on the Ferris wheel there, which still exists to this day, that same Ferris wheel. And we would go for birthday parties. They had covered wagons. You got birthday parties in. We'd go on the pony rides, on the train, all the little amusement rides, the swing, so on and so forth. Those and they had like little Western themed snack bars. It was everybody went. It was the greatest thing ever. And then in the mid 90s, it went out of business. There was a huge flood. It shut them down completely, and it sat and sat and sat. And a family bought it that wanted to turn it into retirement homes, but they can't build there because it's on floodland. Well, so my wife and I would drive by every so often recently for the last so many years to go to vintage markets and so on and so forth, because we're really into really cool old vintage stuff that you just can't get anymore that's made well. And I kept having this idea of like, gee, it'd be really cool to buy that. Just within the last couple years ago, I kept having this idea. It'd be cool to buy it, rebuild it as a little Western town with some amusement rides for $3 a ticket, and like a little gravity house where it's the little tilted house like they have at Knott's Berry Farm, or the mystery spot, and maybe have a little mind cave walkthrough thing towards the back hills and little glowing gems, and call it a day. And that my wife said, oh, and I wanted to have an overnight, like a camping experience where people could sleep in covered wagons or teepees. And my wife said, oh, it should have a little hotel there. Well, there wasn't enough room on 6 usable acres. And there wasn't, and I wanted to have like a little event center for birthdays and stuff. Anyway, that just didn't pan out. But while I was looking at it, my first thought was little shopping with vendors and restaurants with vendors, and call it a day, kind of like Tom's Farms up in Corona. And then I had the idea, well, after visiting Tom's Farms, I don't want to have riffraff, I want to have this for families. So we need to fence it off and charge like maybe $10 to get in, or $5 or something. And then you still do the thing, and then still $3 a ride. And then that kind of morphed into the whole idea of Jackalope Junction. So I didn't even have a name for it at the time until I thought theme park. And I was kind of thinking about, well, what kind of amusements do we have, like Ferris wheel and merry-go-round and stuff like that? And what do we call this place? And the name Jackalope Junction came to mind. And I thought, well, if it's Jackalope Junction, who is our Mickey Mouse? And so it's a jackalope, obviously. And I thought, well, what's his name? Well, Jim sounds good, Jackalope Jim. And left it at that. And that was pretty much it. And then a week later, the idea came to, well, somebody said to me, I think one of my kids said, it'd be cool if Jackalope Jim had a metal arm, a prosthetic robotic arm, and you made it steampunk. And I thought, well, that's not such a great idea. But the next morning I thought, well, that's not such a bad idea. And how do we make that work? So that's where the idea of story came along. Now it wasn't just a place with a mascot. Now it had to become a story. Well, what is Jim's story? Why does he have that arm? And I had the options of either making, because it's the 1800s, he could be a guy that lost his arm in the Civil War. That's an easy one. But I wanted to give it more depth and touch more people. So I made it where he was born without an arm. And that developed more into the story of Jackalope Junction and the story of him and his parents and the gems where he's from in Wyoming. Because I still wanted to keep a mind cave sort of a thing themed to Jackalope Junction. Well, so this is was going to be San Diego still. Now we're going to be in Williams, Arizona. But the story still rung true as to why does he have this arm? What are the gems? What do they do? And so on and so forth. And then I'd start crafting this really rich, deep story about him losing his parents at 10 years old, having to grow up be raised by his grandfather, et cetera, et cetera. And then that led to other characters being developed, like our little minor fellow Senior Mole, and others. And then I started looking at, well, okay, if Jackalope Jim's got this rich story, why don't the others have that as supporting characters and make them their own standouts as well?
So talk a little bit about how those characters' stories, you don't have to get into specifics of too many characters, we'll get to that, but just the idea of how having those backstories and having those interactions with the guests create the value where when the guests leave, it's not like they just ate a whole bowl of candy and they're on a big rush for an hour and then it's like, maybe they've got a souvenir and that's it, but they're leaving with more.
Good point. So each of the characters that I created for Jackalope Junction, from Jackalope Jim to Shotgun Sally to Senior Mole to the Gerties who own the general store, to even the robots that we're going to have, like Mac the robot, and even the bad guys, the Slippery Slope Gang, we don't really get right off into the story of the Slippery Slope Gang. But the point being is that every one of those characters that I've come up with, and we have, I think, close to 15 characters now in the whole world of Jackalope Junction, were created from people I grew up with or worked with in my long career in design and IT and everything. They are based on people or family. They're based on people that have directly affected me, as well as those characters have a little bit of me in every single one of them as well.
Sure.
So the beauty of that is that instead of being, and as much as I love Snoopy, man, he's the coolest. I love Snoopy, Mickey Mouse, Goofy.
Yeah, sure.
They're all fun characters. They make people smile and stuff like that. Our characters will have moments where people smile, but the really deep part of our characters is that they are multi-generational as well. Unlike Mickey Mouse, who's multi-generational for the sake that he's Mickey Mouse, our characters are multi-generational in that they all have a story that's going to affect someone from the age of 5 years old, maybe, or 6 years old, or 10 years old, all the way up to somebody in their 90s or early hundreds. It's going to affect every single one of them because there is not just personality put into them, but there's so much personal put into each of these characters. I thought about how to, and it's crazy because when I was developing each character and coming up with, like who's the lead female character? Okay, well, it's Shotgun. I wanted to base it off of Calamity Jane or something like that. But yeah. I thought, well, what's her name? Shotgun Sally. Okay, what's her story?
Yeah.
And then I started looking at that going, wow, this is a really great story. And as I kept adding to it and typing out what her story was, and I looked at it and it continued to develop, it's like, wow, this is a really sad, tragic story at the same time. She loses the love of her life in a mining accident. So we get this whole story. And then Jackalope Junction has its own backstory too. It wasn't always Jackalope Junction. It was a mining town called Mighty Oak Springs that did really, really well for itself, mining all these gems with all these properties to them.
Yeah.
They're selling both sides of the Civil War. And then they go bust. They have a huge cave-in. Lots of people get killed. 13 miners plus a couple children end up going completely missing. And it's tragic.
So we'll get more into detail about the origin of the mine and everything in the next video. Let's jump back to the characters and maybe talk about Jackalope Jim, because we've talked about that character probably the most. Right, so we've got the jackalope with the steampunk arm, born without an arm, and so what are some of the lessons that, say, kids would take away after they've learned the story of Jackalope Jim and maybe even interacted with the character in the park?
We're going to do a series of children's books about the story of Jackalope Jim and the other characters in Jackalope Junction. We're going to do an animated TV series as well. And then there's going to be stuff in the park you're going to learn about them and be able to interact with the actual Jackalope Jim in the parks. The takeaway, so Jackalope Jim at an early age, his mom is a kind of a tinkerer / homemaker, really keeps, dad, who's so she's a jackrabbit. The dad, who's an antelope owl, is a gunsmith. He's one of the best gunsmiths in the whole West. And then his grandpa on his mom's side, Big Mac, or they call him Big Jim also, and his last name is McTavish. He is a part-time blacksmith just for fun, but he's a lawman. He's a marshal himself. So Jim has his kind of crummy arm. It does a job, but he learns how to shoot really well. His dad teaches him how to shoot, and his grandpa teaches him how to shoot and to be responsible with firearms. So there's a huge earthquake. Jim goes to explore where the earthquake come from, and there's nearby hills. He notices there's this cave. He goes in and discovers all these gems, red, blue, green, yellow. So he touches them and feels them and notices some put out like a vibration, some put out heat. So he grabs a bunch of them, heads back home, shows them to his folks, to his family. And that night, while he goes to bed, his dad and his mom and his grandpa start tinkering with these gems to find out what they really do, and decide to build him a new arm that's powered with these red gems. And the dad builds him a new gun that uses the green gems. So the two tied together create an awesome tool, weapon, basically. And the next morning they show it, he tries it on, it fits him perfectly. He's 10 years old. So he's showing off in the town he fires off his first shot, and it's so fast. I mean, you don't even see him draw. It's so fast, but it ricochets and comes back and clips off part of his ear. That's why he's got the little missing piece of his ear. So he learns to respect that even more. And he's showing off in the town how fast he is. He's the fastest drawer in the West, so on and so forth. He's this kid. He loves it. And sadly, there's some bad guys there that are cowhands, and they want what he has. So they come to his house one night to get the gems, because they want to find them for themselves and use them for evil intentions, obviously. And a fight ensues between his mom and dad and them, and there's gunfire, and Jim looks out his bedroom door and sees his mom and dad lying on the ground, thinking they're dead. So he runs off to his grandpa's house, and the bandits don't find what they're looking for, and they take off, and such is life. So we're really, Jim is then raised by his grandpa to understand the law and respect for the law, but also he's raised in the church to have an understanding of God and Christ, and to grow up to be a good guy. But when he hits 15, he hears about the bandits, decides he's going to go chasing after them, and he still has this weight on him, the loss of his parents, and all these feelings come rushing back. So he goes to avenge the death of his parents, and he goes to look for them, and comes across the one town that they're supposed to be in, and they're not there, but the town is a mess, and people have heard about Jackalope Jim, and they say, can you please stay and be our sheriff? And he's like, look, I'm only 15 years old. Well, back then that's kind of adulty. So, he stays for a couple years and cleans up the place and makes it really a nice, safe little town. And this happens over and over again over the years. So that with Jackalope Jim, what we're really trying to do is have an effect on all these children that are born without limbs, 1 limb, 2 limbs, or their legs or something. How do they adapt to life?
Some type of an obstacle that might be pretty overwhelming for a young person to deal with.
Right, exactly. So we're trying to teach, and he's got all these obstacles he's got to overcome now. You've got the fact that he's from a blended marriage, right?
Yeah.
He's born without an arm, which is really horrible in the 1800s. I mean, that was like defective property.
Sure.
He loses his parents when he's 10 years old, right? So there's all these things that he has to deal with, and he could turn out to be just the worst horrible mess one could possibly imagine. But what he decides to do instead is he's raised properly to understand where he is and what his purpose is, and to have this, I hate to use the term purpose-driven life, but really, he has a purpose, and he has to discover what that purpose is, as we all do. And that's what we want kids to know, look, just because you've had a bad set of circumstances that have happened in your life, whether it's a loss of a parent or a loss of a loved one, or you're shorter than everyone else, or you're taller than everyone else. That's my problem. Or you're skinny, or you're a little more on the heavy set side.
Could be anything.
It doesn't matter who you are. It's what you do with that. And we want children and adults, even to a point, not to feel like they're victims of circumstances. We want them to go, yeah, this may have happened to me, or this may be who I am, but gosh, you know what? I love doing this, or I have a passion for this, or whatever it is, or I have a passion for people. I love people. I don't care if people make fun of me. I love people. I like dressing up and making people happy. I like doing this or this or this. And instead of being victims of life's circumstances, because we all deal with life circumstances, we want to teach kids how to be conquerors, how to be victorious, how to overcome, so that whatever the smallest gift they think they have that was God given to them, because God has a purpose for all of us, how do you take that then and become that person that can have a positive effect on someone else that's down in the dumps? And really, at the end of the day, our goal is to get kids to feel like, instead of feeling like, oh, the world owes me everything, poor me, we want people to feel like, I can be in charge of my life and do great things with it, and really affect people a lot.
That's great. Yeah, that's perfect. And so I think that one of the things that I find really compelling about the whole project is the fact that there are so many lessons that people can learn throughout their visit. And it's not like said in the guise of being preachy or over, or like being overtly, teaching people like, oh, what you're doing is wrong or anything like that. It's a very fun concept, a very fun environment, very interactive and immersive. And so they really get a chance to live a lot of these things. And really, I know we had talked about it in the past. It's like, so when they leave, they have an experience to take with them, but it's a little deeper than that. So they've learned something, they've learned a skill, they've seen an example of, like in Jackalope Jim's case, perseverance and understanding that he's maybe differently abled as opposed to disabled. And in fact, for him, as it turns out, his disability ends up being a huge advantage. Because he's using a steampunk arm and he's overcome, he's become stronger as he's gotten older because he's overcome all those challenges rather than shrink from them or feel like he can't overcome them. And so I love that. I love the whole concept of that. And you've talked about other characters too. So this sort of idea will be replicated with different obstacles that different characters have, different background stories, and we're going to go into all of that in the next edition, because that kind of brings us to the end of this one, Greg. We have to still come up with a great ending because Y'all Come Back Now has already been used, so we'll come up with that soon. So viewers and listeners, thank you for being here. This is Russ the BIG Guy and
Greg Schumsky
for Jackalope Junction Television. And this is the birth of Jackalope Junction. We're having a great time, and we're inviting you to join us. So come on, check out the next episode.